Hello, and welcome to the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure, or RFSI, webinar. This first presentation will provide an overview of the application process. In the Handouts tab on GoToWebinar, you will find the following items: a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, the RFSI Request for Proposals, and the RFSI Frequently Asked Questions document. Recordings of the webinar presentations will be made available on the RFSI website by Friday, December 22nd, 2024. Today's presentations will cover the application process, the proposal itself, and the process of submitting applications through the online platform for submission called Amplifund. In addition to these webinars, we will have weekly office hours starting in January through February 16th, 2024. Please visit the RFSI website for more information on the office hours or to register. In preparing to submit a proposal, the first and most important thing to do is read the Request for Proposals, or RFP. What we are reviewing today is covered in greater detail in the RFP for the program. The RFP is available in the Handouts tab or via the RFSI website at www.cdfa.ca.gov/RFSI. The areas covered are listed here and include information about the program, about the application timeline, on how to apply, and frequently asked questions. The purpose of the Resilient Food Systems Infrastructure Program, or RFSI, is to create more and better processing options for local and regional producers. Projects should support infrastructure in the middle of the supply chain for California food and farm businesses and other eligible entities. Specifically, this refers to activities in the processing and aggregation and distribution stages of the supply chain. Projects focusing on the production or markets and consumer stages are not eligible for RFSI funding. This slide includes examples of typical processing, aggregation, and distribution activities that would be appropriate for RFSI funding. These include packaging, including grading, sorting, and labeling, processing, canning, preserving, or pasteurizing crops, extraction of juice, oil, nut meat, etc. from crops, processing crops, such as chopping, washing, peeling, drying, hulling, milling, shelling, etc., creating value-added products via cooking, baking, juicing, fermenting, distilling, processing, etc., processes or activities involving tracking, storage, cold storage, warehouse, and/or distribution of crops and/or products, enhancing worker safety and/or education in the above or similar activities, and modernizing, developing, or expanding equipment or facilities used for the above or similar activities. Note that this list is not meant to be all-inclusive. Similar activities would also be appropriate for the RFSI program. This is how funding for the program works. USDA gives funding to CDFA, and CDFA subawards funds to recipients. The grant duration is roughly 2.5 years, beginning October 1st, 2024, and ending no later than February 26th, 2027. There are two funding tracks for RFSI grants. Infrastructure grants can request from $100,000 to $3 million. This does not include required matching funds for this grant type. We will speak more on matching funds later. Simplified equipment-only grants can request between $10,000 and $100,000. Here is a more detailed look at the timeline for the RFSI program. Webinars and office hours will continue through the application period. Please visit the RFSI website for more detail and to register. Proposals are due no later than 5:00 p.m. Pacific Time on Monday, February 26, 2024. After administrative and technical review, CDFA will submit successful proposals to USDA for approval in May 2024 and wait for the USDA's final say regarding which projects receive funding. We anticipate announcing and awarding funds in the fall of 2024, then executing grant agreements within 90 days. As a reminder, all projects must close no later than February 26, 2027. Entities eligible to apply for the RFSI program include agricultural producers or processors, or groups of agricultural producers and processors, nonprofit organizations operating middle of the supply chain activities, local government entities operating middle of the supply chain activities, tribal governments operating middle of the supply chain activities, institutions such as schools, universities, or hospitals bringing producers together to establish cooperative or shared infrastructure, or to invest in equipment that will benefit multiple producers' middle of the supply chain activities. All applicant businesses and organizations must be domestically owned, and applicants' facilities must be physically located within the state of California. Proposals undergo 2 levels of review, an administrative review and a technical review. The administrative review is a review conducted by CDFA to verify proposal completeness and eligibility requirements in accordance with program guidelines, such as were all the questions answered, is the budget section completed, were all the costs allowable, etc. The technical review is a review committed by a committee of members who use their expertise to evaluate proposals based on individual merit and consider many factors, including the proposal's likelihood for success and likely impact on the middle of the supply chain. CDFA has identified these program priorities to meet the needs of California's agricultural supply chain and lead to a more resilient food system. These can be reviewed in our Request for Proposals, or RFP. There are 2 tracks for RFSI funding. Simplified equipment-only grants are fixed-price grants, meaning this track will fund only equipment purchases and not associated facility upgrades, staffing, or other costs. And the amount awarded will be equal to the cost of the equipment, between $10,000 and $100,000. Matching funds are not required for equipment-only grants. Approximately $7.5 million will be available for this option. The second track for RFSI funding is for infrastructure grants. This track will fund projects that expand capacity and infrastructure for the aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing, transporting, wholesaling, or distribution of targeted agricultural products. This grant type is subject to matching fund requirements, which we will discuss later in more detail. As a reminder, the minimum amount for infrastructure grants is $100,000, and the maximum is $3 million, exclusive of matching funds. Approximately $22.5 million will be available for infrastructure grants. Infrastructure grant recipients are required to contribute 50% of the total proposed project cost as a match to federal funding. This applies to all applicants except those who qualify for the reduced match described later. Match may consist of cash match, in-kind contributions, or any combination thereof. Funds from other federal grant programs may not be used as match. Funds from state grants may be used as matching funds so long as those funds do not originate from a federal pass-through grant and are not committed elsewhere as matching funds. For historically underserved farmers and ranchers, or for other businesses that qualify under U.S. Small Business Administration categories as disadvantaged small businesses, women-owned small businesses, or veteran-owned small businesses, the required match funding contribution, or cost share, is reduced to 25% of the project cost. Applicants must self-certify in their infrastructure grant applications as being eligible for this reduced match. Please note that nonprofit organizations, local governments, tribal organizations and governments, etc., are not eligible for reduced match. Only the underserved farmers and ranchers and small business categories described here have been approved for reduced match by USDA. Here are some examples of a project with a 50 and a 25% match. Please note that the award limits are for the federal funds requested, not the total project cost. So, an infrastructure grant project with a 50% match could cost up to $6 million, with $3 million coming from federal funds and $3 million coming from match. Again, you can review these tables in more detail in the Request for Proposals, or RFP. There are several ways to receive assistance with your proposal application other than attending or viewing a webinar. CDFA will hold weekly office hours between January 4th and February 13th, 2024. To view the office hours schedule or to register, please visit the RFSI website at www.cdfa.ca.gov/RFSI. CDFA has compiled a frequently asked questions or FAQ document, also available on the RFSI website. Finally, CDFA will conduct 5 rounds of questions and answers, or Q&A, to address general questions about the application process. The schedule is listed on the RFSI website, in the Request for Proposals, and on this slide. Note that the deadline to submit questions will be February 20th, 2024 at 8:00 a.m. Pacific Time. Please remember, the best reference is the Request for Proposals, or RFP, available on the RFSI website. Because funding for the RFSI program is provided by the federal government, all organizations submitting proposals to the RFSI program are subject to the federal cost principles. Federal cost principles are regulations based on organization type used to determine allowable costs and ensure consistent treatment of costs. Applicants are responsible for identifying the federal cost principles appropriate to their organization and ensuring consistent application of the cost principles to the RFSI grant funds. All organizations other than for-profit organizations are subject to the administrative requirements and cost principles in the 2 CFR 200. For-profit organizations are subject to the 48 CFR subpart 31.2. Links to these regulations have been provided in the RFP. However, to help simplify the interpretation of these regulations, CDFA has prepared an unallowable and allowable cost table for infrastructure grants reference, also included in the RFP. The table provides overall guidance for the handling of common costs and includes USDA and CDFA requirements specific to this program. Note that proposals with unallowable costs may be subject to disqualification, so CDFA strongly encourages you to make use of this reference. Further, grant recipients must comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, National Historic Preservation Act, Endangered Species Act, and all other federal environmental laws and regulations, as well as any state and local laws and regulations. In addition, any public infrastructure project funded under this grant must ensure adherence to Build America, Buy America guidance. More detail on all requirements and limitations can be found in the RFP. Please be aware that any of the following may also result in the disqualification of a proposal. Incomplete proposals, that is, proposals with one or more unanswered or insufficiently answered questions. Proposals that include activities outside the grant duration. Proposals for less than the minimum award amount or more than the maximum award amount. Proposals with unallowable costs or activities necessary to complete the project objectives, including, but not limited to, indirect costs that exceed the limit set forth in this document, costs to support ineligible commodities, costs to support activities that are not middle of the supply chain, for example, costs related to cultivation, harvest, wholesale, retail sale, etc. RFSI proposals are submitted through a web-based application called Amplifund. All proposals must be submitted electronically using the Amplifund platform. Each applicant will need to set up a user account to access Amplifund. A walkthrough of how to use Amplifund will be covered later in today's webinar. Here are some of the resources that were discussed in this presentation. A good place to start is the CDFA RFSI website. A link to the recordings of our webinars will be posted on our website promptly. You can also register for the RFSI weekly office hours and access the links to Amplifund on the website. Another resource to submit questions is to the CDFA grants email address listed here. We've also included direct links to our request for proposals and frequently asked questions documents. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Agricultural Marketing Service website contains a lot of great information about the RFSI. However, please note that you should direct all questions to CDFA, as USDA will always refer you back to us. That concludes the application presentation. We'll take a break now for some Q&A. Please continue to submit your questions in the GoToWebinar Questions tab.